introduction, and I'd like to thank the organizers, especially Professor Kumar Murthy, for inviting me to give this talk at Fields Institute. Whenever I think of Fields Institute, I get reminded of all those times we used to sneak in and steal some coffee exactly at 3 p.m. from conferences and workshops that we wouldn't be attending during my grad school days. Really good times. So today I'm going to talk about the generalized Diophantine M tuples. And this talk, I'm going to make it completely self-contained. So if there are any graduate students, they should be able to benefit from this. Okay, so what is a Diophantine M tuple? So we start with M positive. So let's say we have M positive integers. Then we say that it's a Diophantine M tuple if let's say A1, A2, AM is the set, then we say that this set is a Diophantine M tuple if AI, AJ plus 1 is a perfect square where AI is not equals to J. Okay. Why can't I see? Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. So the reason it is called a Diophantine M tuple is because Diophantus came up with a quadruple of rational numbers with this property. But studying rational tuples is a more intricate job, so we are going to stick to studying integers. The first example of the Diophantine quadruple was given by Fermat, and this is the example 1, 3, 8, and 20. If you look at 1 times 3 plus 1, that's 4. 3 times 8 plus 1, 25. 3 times 120 plus 1 is 361. All of them are squares. And a more generalized, more generalized family of infinite Diophantine quadruples was given by Euler, who said that if you start with any two numbers AB such that AB plus 1 is R square, then in fact you should be able to extend it to a quadruple as A plus B plus 2R, and 4 times R plus A and R plus B. And this is a generalization of Fermat's quadruple, because if you choose your A to be 1 and B to be 3, you get Fermat's quadruple. So there are several questions which arise from here. For instance, if I start with a triple, let's say I start with 1, 2, 3, are there many ways of extending it to, there are many ways of extending it to a Diophantine quadruple. So towards that, there's a result of Baker and Davenport, who showed that there is exactly one way in which you can extend 138 as a Diophantine quadruple. Like if 138D is a Diophantine quadruple, then D must be equal to 120. So this also tells us that this 138 cannot be further extended, because if it was a quintuple, then if the 138D1D2 forms a Diophantine M tuple, then 138D1 and 138D2 would form Diophantine quadruples, and that doesn't happen. So naturally, the question would be, how large can these Diophantine tuples be? Are there Diophantine quintuples, sextuples, septuples? Can we have an infinite set, which is a Diophantine tuple, and so on? To get a feel for this question, let me introduce following notion. So suppose S is a set which is a Diophantine tuple, that is AIAJ plus 1 is a perfect square. Now consider the elliptic curve y square is equals to A1 x plus 1, A2 x plus 1, and A3 x plus 1. Now notice that if I take x is equals to A4, then A1 A4 plus 1 is a square, A2 A4 plus 1 is a square, A3 A4 plus 1 is a square. So that kind of generates an integer point on this elliptic curve. And similarly, if I take x as A5, that will generate an integer point. So we have A4, A5, and each of these numbers in the set S would generate an integer point on this elliptic curve. But recall that the result due to Siegel says that there are only finitely many integer points on any elliptic curve. So we immediately conclude that this Diophantine tuple must be a finite set. We cannot have an infinite set of Diophantine tuples. However, in Siegel's result, this although we know that this is finite, but the bound that we get would depend on the coefficients. So we don't really know that there is an absolute constant by which the number of these tuples, by which the size of this Diophantine tuple is bounded. But then towards that, Dugela in fact showed in a bunch of papers, he showed that there are no Diophantine sextuples. That means we cannot have a set of 6 elements which forms a Diophantine tuple. And there are at most finitely many Diophantine quintuples. So like for some time, there was this Diophantine quintuple conjecture which said that there are no Diophantine quintuples, and Dugela showed that there are at most finitely many of them. And very recently, this quintuple conjecture got resolved by the work of Togbe and Ziegler. There are many intermediate works in between, but my apologies that I'm not being able to state all of them. So this was resolved recently that there are no Diophantine quintuples. So quadruples is the maximum size of the set that we have with this property. Now you may think that the story ends here, but there are some unanswered questions in this arena. For example, if you have a Diophantine triple, then we know that we can always extend it to a Diophantine quadruple. So one can ask, can we have a generalization of the Baker-Davenport type of theorem, that if you start with the ABC Diophantine triple, is there a unique way that we can extend it to a Diophantine quadruple? Now this is still unknown. The best that we know is given a Diophantine triple, we can extend it to a Diophantine quadruple in at most 8 possible ways, but that's the best that is known so far. Now let's look at a slightly more generalized generalization of this problem. So we say that a Diophantine tuple, we say that a set of integers a1, a2, am is a Diophantine M tuple with property Dn if ai, aj plus n is a perfect square. So here in the classical case, in the previous case, we had n is equals to 1, and here we are looking at ai, aj plus n. Now n can really be any integer, positive or negative, but for the purpose of this talk, let's just think of n as a positive integer. Now the question is, as before, we can ask the same question: are there any Diophantine quintuples with property Dn? Can one of you make a guess whether we should have a Diophantine quintuple? We know that when n is equals to 1, we only have Diophantine quadruples, and there are no Diophantine quintuples. Can one make a guess whether there will be a Diophantine quintuple with property Dn? Okay, so I don't hear any guesses. So let me just give the answer to you. The answer is yes, and here is an example. So 133, 105, 320, and 18240 is in fact a Diophantine quintuple with property D256. So natural question is, can we have can we have Diophantine M tuple with property Dn where the size of the set is arbitrarily large? So first let's do some sanity check to see that this S cannot be an infinite set, again using Ziegel's theorem, and considering this elliptic curve, y square is equals to a1x plus n, a2x plus n times a3x plus n. We know that there are finitely many integer points on this elliptic curve, and that gives that implies that the set S should be a finite set. Okay. Now, to get a feel for how large this set S could be, we invoke a conjecture due to Koperus, Harris, and Major, which says that if you start with any curve over rational numbers of genus greater than 2, greater than equals to 2, then there exists a constant independent of the curve and only dependent on the genus, such that the number of rational points on this curve is bounded by that constant. Now suppose, let's try to apply this conjecture in our context. Suppose we have a set S given by A1 to AM, which is a Diophantine M tuple with property Dn, that is AI Aj plus n is a perfect square. Then consider the following curve: y square is equals to A1x plus n, A2x plus n, up to A5x plus n. Now, if we use the genus degree relation, g is equals to d minus 1 times d minus 2 over 2, then that tells us the genus of this curve is greater than or equals to 2, and therefore by the Kooperaes-Harris-Mazur conjecture, there should be a constant independent of n and independent of all these coefficients, is that the number of rational points on this curve is bounded by that constant, and therefore the number of integer points is bounded by that constant. So the Kooperaes-Harris-Mazur conjecture implies that this M, which is the size of the set, is bounded, and the bound is independent of Ai and n. So conjecturally, we kind of understand that the size of this set should really be bounded. So we make the following definitions. So for n, a natural number, we define Mn to be the largest size of S. So the largest cardinality of S, supremum of the cardinality of S, such that S is a Diophantine tuple with property Dn. And we also define another function An, which is looking at the set of the largest S, such that it's a Diophantine tuple with property Dn, but each element is larger than n cube. So we are basically looking at a set where all the elements are large enough. And again, by Kooperaes-Harris-Mazur conjecture, both Mn and An are absolutely bounded by a constant independent of n. Okay, so the bounds on Mn, so Kooperaes-Harris-Mazur conjecture, as I just said, implies that Mn is bounded by absolute constant. And then Dujela showed that this An is in fact bounded by 24. So we cannot have a set S with very large elements, with elements greater than n cube. Well, we cannot have a very large set where all the elements are large enough. So if all the elements are greater than n cube, then it is bounded by 24. So we are basically restricted to looking at the set between 1 to n cube and see how many elements there can we pick to construct a Diophantine M tuple with property Dn. And he showed that that set, the set S, the size of the set S is bounded by a constant times log n. And now there are again there are several results which I am not really mentioning here. For example, it was shown by Luca and Dujela that if I choose my n to be a prime number, then this is in fact absolutely bounded. The Mn is big O of 1. And there are some other results of the type which says that if n is 2 modulo 4, then Mn is actually less than or equals to 3, and so on. But for a general n, we only know that Mn is big O of log n, and the best implied constant is due to the work of Ramamurthy and Riley-Becker. And another interesting connection of this problem is to that of Paley graph conjecture, which I'm going to describe in a few slides. And it says that if you assume this conjecture, it's a mild conjecture and it is known in certain cases. If you assume the Paley graph conjecture, then Mn is in fact bounded by a constant times log n to the epsilon. And this is a nice observation, and this was done by Ramamurthy and Ahmed Guloglu. So now we further generalize the problem, and we define a set S to be a Diophantine M tuple with property dkn if ai aj plus n is a kth power, for I is not equals to j. So far we have been looking at squares. Now we are looking at general kth powers. And now we can ask the exact same question as to how large can the can this tuple be? So we define for n in a natural number mkn as a supremum of the largest size of this S, and mknl as the largest size of S, where each element is greater than n to the L for some L and all the elements have property, and the set has property dkn. Again, it is unclear, it is a priori unclear whether these sets are finite or not. But conjecturally, by the Kooperaes-Harris major conjecture, if we consider this particular curve, which has genus greater than 2, we know that this MKN and MKNL are in fact finite sets, and they are bounded by a number which is independent of n. Okay, it's not independent, but it's bounded by something which is independent of n. Now for n is equals to 1, that is, if I look at ai aj plus 1 being kth power, we have the following result due to Bugeaud and Duzela. Now if I look at ai aj plus 1 to be a cube, then that set is at most has cardinality 7. For fourth powers, m4 1 is at most 5. For powers between for fifth to 176th power, it is bounded by 4, and for k greater than equals to 177, it is in fact bounded by 3. So you may ask whether these are the best possible bounds that we have. The answer to that is expected to be no, and we actually expect each of these bounds to be bounded by 3. So this is the case where n is equals to 1, and our main theorem today is for a general n, and we kind of show the following. So this is joint work with Ram Murthy and Soo-Young Kim, and we show that for k greater than equals to 3, that means we are looking at cubes or higher powers. For any L greater than 1, mknl is bounded, and the bound only dependent on k but independent of n. And remember that mknl consists of the set S, where each element is greater than n to the power of L. And in fact, more precisely, we can in fact show that this mknl is bounded by a constant times log k. But that's not something that we will discuss during the talk. And if you look at mkn in general, that means we also count the smaller numbers in the set S, then unconditionally we get that mkn is bounded by log n. And under the Paley graph conjecture, we get that mkn is less than log n to the epsilon, exactly analogous to what we had for k is equals to 2. Okay. And for the rest of the talk, I'm going to give you an idea of the proof of how to prove this theorem. And the proof relies on sieve method, which is one of the, I'm going to introduce one of the sieves, the Gallagher's large sieves. So the question is very simple. The question is, we start with set S, which is a subset of natural numbers between 1 to n. And we want to give a bound on the size of S. Now, suppose we know, well, let's define SP as S modulo P. So basically, we are looking at all the residue classes mod P that S hits. And we call that set SP for a prime P. And the thing is, suppose we know SP, the size of SP for many primes P, then we would like to say something about the size of S. Can we say how large this S is if we know how large SPs are? So that's the that is the basic principle of using any sieves. Now Gallagher sieve is one of the very easier sieves, and I'm going to sketch a way of seeing what Gallagher sieve is all about. So let me define SPA as all the elements in S which are A modulo P. Then clearly we have that the cardinality of S is equals to the size of SPA summed over all the residue classes modulo P. And remember that the number of residue classes that appears here is exactly equals to SP. And now what we do is we use Cauchy-Schwarz inequality. Cauchy-Schwarz inequality of the form that, or you can also say root mean square greater than equals to arithmetic mean type of inequality. So we basically use the fact that x1 plus x2 up to xn divided by n whole square is less than equals to x1 square plus x2 square up to xn square divided by n. Just a very simple Cauchy-Schwarz inequality. And if you use that, you get the following. You get that s square divided by sp. Remember that mod of sp is the number of residue classes appearing here. That is less than or equals to the sum over each of these squares. Now, this is the key step in this Gallagher's large sieve. The rest of it is just being pedantic and following your nose. So once we have this, then we can write s square times summation of lambda p over sp, where lambda p is the von Mongold function, as following. We can write it as lambda p, just using the Cauchy-Schwarz inequality as above. This is just summing over the residue classes spa square. But I can rewrite this this sum, because this sum is just going over all the residue classes. So I can rewrite it as the double sum st in S, where S and T are congruent modulo P. S is congruent to T modulo P, belonging to the same residue classes, and sum it over 1. Now, if I interchange summation, I get the following. And and now I can just split this sum in two ways. One is S is equals to T, and the other is S is not equals to C. So these are just standard computations that you can perform, and this gives rise to so if you simplify it, you get the Gallagher sieve. And the Gallagher sieves in its so the statement of the Gallagher sieve is as follows. Suppose we start with S, a subset of 1 to n, and let's say for any q between 1 and n, we can give the following bound on S. So, the cardinality of S is less than or equals to p less than equals to q log p minus log n divided by the summation of p up to q log p over sp minus log n. So notice that if we understand this mod of sp for many primes p, that gives us a mod of s. And that is what that is essentially what we are going to use in the proof of our main result. Okay, so now let's go back to how to use this Gallagher sieve. So I'm going to give you the proof, the idea of the proof in the case k is equals to 2. So remember that, so k is equals to 2, meaning ai aj plus n being a square. So remember that in this case, Dujela already showed that we cannot have a Diophantine M tuple. Sorry, if elements in the tuple are greater than n square, greater than n cube, then there are at most 24 of them. So really, we can restrict ourselves to studying sets where each of these elements AIs is less than n cube. So let's say we have a set S, A1 to AM, be a Diophantine M tuple with property Dn, that is Aij plus n is a perfect square. Now, for I equals to 1 or minus 1, here I define S of I as all the sets, all the elements in SP, which are either quadratic residues or quadratic non-residues. Here A over P denotes the Legendre symbol. So then I can write my SP as, I can split it into two parts. I can say this is quadratic residues plus quadratic non-residues, and I have put an extra 1 just in case 0 is present in SP. Now notice the following. If I sum over distinct ABs, so that means I choose A from SI and choose something which is other than A, so that is SI times mod SI minus 1. Summing over distinct ABs, that's what this summation prime indicates. AB plus N over P. Here, remember that AB plus N is always a perfect square. So the Legendre symbol AB plus N over P will always be 1. So this identity in fact holds in this case. Now, using this identity, we will try to give a bound on SPs, because remember the Gallagher sieve required us to find bounds on SPs so that we can use that to give bounds on uh, a bound on the set S itself. Okay, so in order to use this identity to find bounds on SIs, we will use what is called the Vinogradov's inequality, which says the following. Suppose you have chi mod q, a non-trivial Dirichlet character modulo q, and let's say n be an integer, and suppose A and B are subsets of Z mod QZ star, and in B we are allowing 0 uh, to be a part of P. Then if I look at this character sum chi of AB plus n, where A is in A and B is in B, then it is bounded by square root of 2q, the size of A times the size of P. Now this bound on this character sum was proved by Vinogradov. A couple of comments here. This 2 in which appears on the right hand side is not really required. This inequality holds even if we drop the 2. And for a nice crisp proof of this fact, I can refer you to the paper of Ramamurthy and Riley Becker. So now let's use this to find a bound on SI. So in this particular summation, remember that the Legendre symbol is a Dirichlet character, it's a quadratic Dirichlet character. So if I choose my A and B as SIs, then in fact I can use the Vinogradov's inequality to say that this summation is bounded by the mod of SI times square root of P. And because your SP itself was just SI plus with just the sum of SIs, so we immediately get that SP is also less than square root of P. Because you see on the left hand side here we just have something like SI square, and on the right hand side we have SI times square root of P. So we get SI is less than square root of P, and therefore SP is less than square root of P. Now you can ask that why did I divide it into quadratic residues and non-residues? One doesn't have to do that in this particular case, but it will be helpful in our next treatment. That's why I did it over here. So once we have this SPs, the size of SPs is bounded by square root of P. Now we can use our Gallagher sieve. But remember, in case of Gallagher sieve, we had these n's and q's which had to be chosen. Let me just go back for a second so I can show you. This is the bound that we have. Here we can choose any q which is less than n, and we'll also have to make a choice of n. So if you make the choice of n, capital N, to be small n cube, because we are restricting ourselves to looking at only elements up to n cube, and you choose your q to be log n square and apply the Gallagher's sieve, you immediately get a bound on the size of S to be a constant times log n. This is exactly what we have. Are there any questions so far? Okay, excellent. And the next part is the connection to Paley graph conjecture. Now, Paley graph conjecture says the following. Suppose you have epsilon greater than 0, a real number, and you take two subsets of FP for an odd prime P, and let's say both the subsets have at least the size P to the epsilon. Then for any character modulo Q, non-trivial character modulo Q, if I look at this character sum chi of A plus B, where A is in A and B is in B, then in fact it is bounded above by P to the minus delta for a small delta times the size of A and size of P. Now one can use this to give a bound, to give a better bound on the Diophantine tuple. Now remember that when we are using the Gallagher sieve, there are basically two different things. Either we give a better bound on these SPs, or we get a better sieve. It's harder to get a better sieve, so we just focus on giving a better bound on SPs. And here we use this Paley graph conjecture, and we have the following. So you have Si times Si minus 3. Now the reason we have minus 3 here is because of certain redundancies. For example, you may have that a square plus n is a quadratic non-residue modulo p, and so on and so forth, some technical thing. So you have some si times si minus 3 is less than or equal to ab plus n over p. Now notice that each of these should really be 1. And this I can rewrite as, if I take out a over p, then and take the absolute value, it becomes b plus na inverse over p. And I use the Paley graph conjecture on the set Si and n Si inverse to get that this is less than or equals to some p to the minus delta times Si square. And this will imply that your Sp is now less than p to the epsilon. Remember, in the previous case, it was square root of p. Now we get it's less than p to the epsilon. And using that in the Gallagher sieve and choosing your n's and q's carefully, you in fact get that the size of S is bounded above by log n to the epsilon. So this is a nice application of this Paley graph conjecture in this context. Okay, so what do we have so far? So okay, so let me just say what happened. So this was the proofs that I gave so far was for squares when aij plus n are squares. Now let's look at kth powers. So in case of cubes or higher powers, what we have is the following. Suppose S is a1 to am, a Diophantine M tuple with property dkn. Now, if each of these AIs is less than or equals to n to the L for some L greater than 1, remember in the case of squares, we knew that we were restricting ourselves to the sets where AI is less than or equals to n cube. Now, if we restrict ourselves to a set where AIs are less than a power of n, then in fact, adaptation of the methods just described will give you that this m is less than log n. It's not exactly the same method. We need to be a little more careful. We have to now replace the quadratic, the Legendre symbol with the power residue symbol. By doing that, we can in fact do something better. We don't have to restrict our set S to integers. We can in fact look at S in the ring of integers of cyclotomic fields Q zeta K. So there are these slight generalizations one can get, but more or less one gets the result that we had for k is equals to 2. So we get that unconditionally the size of the set S is bounded by log n, and under the Paley graph conjecture, the size of the set S is bounded by log n to the log n to the epsilon. But here again, we were looking at S where each element is bounded above by some power of n. So the key step that still remains to be proved is if we look at the set S where all its elements are greater than a power of L, so that we defined as mknl, we still need to show that that is bounded, that is absolutely bounded. And in order to do that, let me sketch the proof of that. So let's say, so we can take k to be k greater than 2 to be a positive, to be an odd positive integer, because if it is an even integer, then we can replace it as a square and we will get the bounds that we had by Dujella's theorem itself. So for an odd positive integer k, consider this system of equations: a1x plus n is equals to u to the k, and a2x plus n is equals to v to the k. Notice that if you have your S as A1, A2, A3 dot 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 as the Diophantine tuple with property dkn, then X is equals to A3, X is equals to A4. Each of them will generate solutions for this system of equations. So if we are able to show that there are only finitely many solutions for the system of equations, then we will be done. So let alpha be a1 over a2 to the power 1 over k. Then I can do the following. I can multiply the first equation with a2, second equation with a1, take the difference, then I get n times a2 minus a1 is just a2 u to the k minus a1 v to the k. And I can rewrite it as A2 times product of u to the k minus alpha v to the k, which can be split as u minus alpha zeta k to the jv, where zeta k is just the primitive kth root of unity. And if we put together all the terms, because k is odd, now we can put together the terms j and k minus j, and remove the j is equals to 0th term, which is u minus alpha v. And I get this is equals to a2 times u minus alpha v and this particular product. And using some simple elementary approximation, basically using the fact that if you have a complex number z is equals to x plus iy, then mod z square is greater than y square. If you use that, you will get that this particular thing in the left hand side is greater than or equals to this particular thing. Now here notice that if I notice that here when we have u minus alpha v, so if I divide this with v, I would get a well, if I divide it with v, I will get v to the k over here, and over here I will just get u over v minus alpha. So basically we will get u over v minus alpha, and the rest of the terms over here, if I take that to the other side, this n times a2 minus a1. So essentially I will get that this u minus this particular term u minus alpha v, sorry. Anyway, so we will get that this u over v minus alpha is less than or equals to a2 over v to the k. So what we have done here is, if we are able to show that, so this u, so what we have done here is we have seen that this u over v is a very good approximation of, very good rational approximation of alpha. And if you're able to show that this alpha doesn't have many good rational approximation, then we are done, because then we will get that there will be very few u over v with satisfying this property. Okay, so now in order to do that, so in order to that, we establish a gap principle. Now, gap principle is as follows. Suppose you have ui, vi be the set of solutions to the above system of linear equations. Then we would like to say that this vi and vi plus 1 have a large gap between them. Like there is a big jump between vi and vi plus 1. Now, how do we establish that? So look at 1 over vi times vi plus 1. Now this is certainly less than equals to some constant over vi minus some constant over vi plus 1. And you can use triangle inequality here. So ui over vi minus alpha plus alpha minus ui over vi. But remember, we already established that this ui over vi minus alpha is small, which is just 2a2 divided by vi to the k. And let's also assume that this vi is less than vi plus 1. So I can write it as 2i's of a2 divided by vi to the k. So this is less than a2 over vi to the k. This is less than a2 over vi to the vi plus 1 to the k. But vi plus 1 is larger. So I write it as 2i's of a2 vi to the k. So thus we get vi plus 1. If you simplify this, you get vi plus 1 is greater than or equal to vi to the k minus 1 divided by 2a2. So means to say that your vi plus 1 is almost like a power of vi. So in other words, vi plus 2 would be an even larger power of vi if you use this iteratively, and vi plus l will look like this particular power of vi divided by 2a2 times this power. Now in other words, if you have each of these AIs is greater than equals to n to the L, which is what we had that all the elements are greater than some power of n, then from from the bound over here, we can in fact conclude that Vi is greater than n to the I theta for some theta greater than 0. So the rate at which this Vi grows is at least at the rate of n to the I theta. Now, if I'm able to show that these VIs are bounded by some large power of n, some n to the m, let's say, then I would be done, because at every stage it is growing at least by a power of theta. And if it is bounded above by something, then I'm done. And that is essentially what we will do. But for the purpose of this talk, in order to show that VIs are bounded above by a power of n, I'm going to assume the ABC conjecture. Now I must say that we have a method which does not use to get around this ABC conjecture, and I will say a few words about it towards the end. But for the sake of exposition, for a clearer exposition, let me assume the ABC conjecture. Now, reminding you what the ABC conjecture is, this was formulated, or this was first stated by Masser and Oesterle. So let radical of n, rad of n, denote the product of distinct prime divisors of n. Then given any epsilon, there exists a constant k epsilon, such that for co-prime numbers ABC, if a plus b is equals to c, then c is less than a constant times the radical of ABC to the 1 plus epsilon. Now this is the ABC conjecture. Now let's try to apply this conjecture in our context. So if we have, so we apply this to this particular equation. Remember this equation, this came about over here. Over here, the first step that we had here. So we just stick to this equation, and so that is a1 b to the k is n times a1, a2 minus a1 plus a2 u to the k. So this is your c, this is your a, and this is your b. So we get that a1 b to the k is less than the radical of all the other terms put together to the power 1 plus epsilon. Now, because your v is greater than u, and well, a2 is greater than a1, so you get this is less than or equals to some a2 cube b square and to the whole to the 1 plus epsilon. But we also know that our k is greater than 2. So since k is greater than equals to 3, we can find absolute constant kappa such that v is less than max of n and a2 to the power of some kappa. So we're kind of almost done, because we already knew that at each by the gap principle, at each stage your vi grows at least at the rate of a power of n. And we also know that to begin with, our v1 is greater than a2, the kth root of a2. So we can in fact conclude that the set mkn is bound, mknl is bounded from here, because this is exactly what we wanted to show, that it is bounded above by a power of n. Okay, so this is the proof assuming ABC conjecture, but we don't really need ABC conjecture for to tackle this problem. So remember that the proof of this proof of MKNL being bounded relied on the fact that there are very few good rational approximation to this rational number a1 over a2 to the k. So when I say good rational approximation, I mean a2 over up to a2 over b to the k. Now, when we talk about rational approximations of algebraic numbers, Dirichlet showed that there are in fact infinitely many rational numbers p over q such that
Anu,
yes,
just
sir.
a quick comment. I think
Yeah.
you mean a1 over a2 to the 1 over k.
Oh yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, this is alpha is a1 over a2 to the 1 over k. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so when in the context of rational approximations of algebraic numbers, Dirichlet showed that there are infinitely many rational numbers p over q such that alpha minus p over q is less than 1 over q square. That is something one can realize using continued fraction. And there's this remarkable theorem of Roth, which is a famous theorem, which says that if you start with any algebraic irrational number, and if you're looking at a rational approximation of this kind, that alpha minus p over q is less than or equals to 1 over q to the 2 plus epsilon, then there are in fact only finitely many such rational approximations. But how many of them are there is a much more difficult problem, and that is what we really need to have in our situation. We need to really figure out how many rational numbers. We know that there may be finitely many good rational approximation, but we exactly need to get our hands on how many of them. So we use a quantitative version of Roth's theorem due to Corvaya, and that saves us, and that in fact gives us the theorem. Okay. I will stop here. Thank you very much. Thanks for your attention.
Okay. Thanks, Anup. There is some funny icon here that's supposed to say, yes. You can do that too. Okay, good. Any questions or comments for Anup? I can't see everybody, so, and I think the number, you can just speak up if you have a question or comment. No, everybody's very silent. So let's see, can you just go back to that last slide? Yeah, so what does Corvaja's theorem say?
Oh, so it's okay. So it says that it says that suppose you have alpha minus p over q is less than equals to 1 over, let's say, q to the some kappa, for some kappa bigger than 2. Then, well, under certain conditions, it gives you a lower bound on this kappa. So it says, and that is what we use.
Lower bound so that there exist solutions or something, or what?
No, so so it's saying that suppose there are certain conditions on these P and Q, then kappa has to be, a kappa can be at most, sorry, kappa has to be, sorry, some upper bound on kappa, sorry, then kappa is at most something. That's what it is saying. So it's equivalent to, and it's less than.
If I can say something, can I say something?
Yeah.
Okay. So the interesting thing is everyone knows that Roth's theorem is ineffective. Okay, this is a well-known fact. But it's interesting that right after Roth wrote his famous paper in the 50s, Davenport and Roth got together and asked themselves the question, can we make it effective? Believe it or not, they actually sat down and said, is it possible? And what they've managed to do is they actually showed that they could count the number of violations of the inequality effectively. And this is not well known. It's a short paper, but the shortness of the paper is deceptive because they're referring back to Roth's famous paper. And they're telling at this step, we can change this. At that step, we can, but it's interesting that opens the door for trying to get some sort of effective estimates of exceptions. And that has been fine-tuned over the years by Bombiri and Mueller and various other people, and Corvaja seems to have the finest version of it.
Comes in when Bombiri is looking at 2A type equations.
Yeah.
Trying to estimate numbers. Is he using this technique? Oh,
He's using techniques of that nature, yes, exactly, where they count the number of
yeah,
solutions.
exactly, the number of solutions. And who is that?
Yeah, Schmidt and Mueller and Bombiri.
No, but Evereste?
Yeah, Evereste and Schmidt as well. These people were all trying to come up with estimates. So there's a kind of interesting thing. Even though Roth's theorem is ineffective, you can estimate the number of exceptions effectively.
No, you can effective estimates for the number of solutions, but you can't bound the size of the solution.
You can't bound the size, exactly. Yeah. So that's basically the idea here.
Very nice. Any other questions or comments for Anup or for Ram or anybody else? I'm not seeing anybody. Everybody's very quiet. Okay, so I think it's a really beautiful talk, beautiful results. It starts off with what looks like a very simple-minded or concrete problem, but then quickly involves a lot of problems, a lot of deep aspects of differential geometry, arithmetic geometry. So it's really nice, very well done.